For this week, we are looking at three thinkers, Aristotle, Augustine, and Aquinas. And just to do a brief recap, last time, remember we looked at Plato's political philosophy, and the conclusion of his political thought is that we need a philosopher king who can guide us into goodness, beauty, and truth. That was the main conclusion from Plato. And to get into these concepts of goodness, beauty, and truth, Plato argued that those are real concepts that can be discovered in what he called the realm of the forms. Now, Plato had a student named Aristotle who in some ways agreed with his teacher, but also had some significant differences. If Plato thought that there was the realm called the forms where you can access these concepts, Plato argued, or Aristotle rather, argued that all of those concepts exist here in the real world. And what we're going to see as we get into Aristotle is that there are places where his approach to politics nuances some of the conclusions that Plato came to. So even though they have significant differences when it comes to their overall philosophy, there are things that are complementary when it comes to their political thought. So for Aristotle, politics is about learning how to live, how to best live with each other. That's really what politics is all about. The moment that you have a society, you have to figure out how do we live well together. And doing that involves cultivating virtue. So this is true for individuals, and this is true for society as a whole. And the type of virtue that he's talking about is the virtue that leads to human flourishing, an idea that he calls eudaimonia. So that's actually the goal of all of ethics for Plato, and that's the goal of politics. How do we create a society that leads to overall human flourishing? And in his Nicomachean Ethics, he writes this: "The present inquiry does not aim at theoretical knowledge like the others, for we are inquiring not in order to know what virtue is, but in order to become good, since otherwise our inquiry would have been of no use." So Aristotle's political philosophy really comes off of his approach to ethics, which is oftentimes called a virtue approach to ethics. And what makes his approach to ethics different than some of the contemporary approaches to ethics that we have today is that Aristotle really argues that ethics is not just about knowing what the right thing is to do. It's not just about discovering correct behaviors, discovering moral laws, but it's actually about becoming a virtuous person. It's about becoming good so that the actions that flow out of you are the right types of action. So it's about becoming a virtuous person. And the way that this leads into politics is sort of from the bottom up. So if you think about what a family is for, a family is for being virtuous. So parents should teach their children the correct types of habits that develop the correct type of character that lead them to become virtuous citizens. Those virtuous citizens lead into virtuous communities, which eventually lead into virtuous cities and virtuous countries. And those countries, the purpose of all of those is, again, for human flourishing. So for Aristotle, this big concept is really about justice, telos, which means purpose, and honor. And so to understand these concepts, we might ask just three questions that help us get after what Aristotle is trying to do. So if you ask the question, what is the purpose of the family? Or for us today, we might ask, what is the purpose of education? Aristotle argues that it's to instill the habits that develop character that leads to virtuous citizens. That's why you have a family. That's why you have education. It's not just about instilling knowledge. It's about developing virtuous citizens. And so once you have a society, what's the purpose of that? It's to become an environment that produces human flourishing, That's why we live in societies with one another, so that there can be human flourishing. And so that leads into a question, what is the purpose of politics? It's to govern society justly, which means to lead to the telos, or the purpose of human flourishing. That eudaimonia is what Aristotle is all about. Well, to lead justly, we have to understand something about justice. So what does it mean to have a just society? Again, if we think about contemporary understandings of justice today, there are all these different principles that we establish a government off of. So one principle might be utility, or the utilitarian principle, which says to do the right thing, or to create a just society, we ought to do that which makes the most amount of people happy. That is how you create a just society. Or another principle is the principle of liberty, the libertarian principle, which says to create a just society, we want to do create the types of laws that protect individual rights. That's what we want to do. Or you could take a deontological approach, which comes from the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who argues that there are rules out there that we can discover, just and good rules. And so we want to discover these rules and live according to them, regardless of what the consequences are, because they're just rules that are objective, that's true, regardless if they lead to good outcomes or not. And then there are principles of equality, the egalitarian principle, which was promoted by a philosopher named John Rawls, who argued that we ought to create a society that leads to fairness behind what he calls the veil of ignorance. So if we were not taking into account our lot in life, where we were going to be born, whether we were going to have a large amount of wealth, being born into a rich family or a poor family, our race or anything like that, if we did not consider anything about who we are, and we were just going to construct a society based off of that blindness of our own lot in life, what type of society would we create? John Rawls argues that we would want to create a society that leads to fairness, where those who are left the least well off would not be left destitute, and those who have great means would be properly incentivized to continue to work as hard as they would want to work. Well, Aristotle disagrees with all of this. Aristotle argued that justice is about giving people the things that they deserve. Now, this involves two things. It involves people and it involves things. So every person is different and things are different. So we need to ask, what type of virtues or skills do people have? And then we must also establish the purpose of the things that we are using. So think for a moment about just the ethics of distribution. How do we distribute things? Well, let's say we were distributing flutes. Who should play flutes? Who should get flutes so that they could play them? If we're taking an Aristotelian approach to ethics and political life, Aristotle argues that we need to first establish what is the purpose of a flute. And the purpose of a flute is to make beautiful music. If that's the purpose, then the people who should have flutes and play them should be the people who are the most skilled at using that instrument properly. So whoever the best musicians, whoever the best flute players are, they should be the ones who are playing the flutes. Or we could ask the question, who should farm? Well, those who have the most skill at farming should have the opportunity and be given the land so that they can farm well. Who should become doctors? Those who have the highest aptitude to become doctors. And who should rule society? Those who are the most equipped, who have the best understanding of what justice is, what virtue is, who can lead properly. I mean, this kind of goes back to Plato's idea. Those who are the most skilled at ruling should be the ones who rule. And so in this way, Aristotle has a big picture view of society. The way that society leads to the flourishing of society as a whole and people as individuals is when everyone is sort of playing their proper role. So that involves knowing, again, the skills, the passions, the desires of individuals, and getting them to live virtuously according to the skills that they have. So that is, in a nutshell, Aristotle. Augustine will have some significant differences with all of the Greek philosophers that came before him. So now this is after the establishment of Christianity, and for the next several hundred years after Augustine, political philosophy is really shaped by Christian theology. So Augustine says that the problem with the Greek philosophers is that they have wished with amazing folly to be happy here on earth and to achieve bliss by their own efforts. So he looks at someone like Aristotle, and Aristotle is, and Plato as well, both of these philosophers are looking at the purpose of government to shepherd human societies so that you can lead to human flourishing or to bliss here on earth. And Augustine saw this as they're just trying to do this by their own efforts, trying to create a society in a way that human ingenuity can just bring about the eudaimonia that Aristotle is after. And so he says this isn't the right way to go. That said, he was still very much influenced by these philosophers. So Plato's influence on Augustine is pretty obvious to see. So again, for Plato, he argued that there is this realm of the forms and there are the realm of the particulars. So for Plato, we can use our thoughts, our mind, to access the realm of the form, where you have ideas like the idea of the tree. And then we have our 5 physical senses where we can get access to the physical world, where we can see things there. But remember, the physical world are just the shadows of reality. The reality itself is in the realm of the forms. Well, for Augustine, he argued that real reality, prime reality, is not the realm of the forms, but it's actually the mind of God, which is still a non-material realm, but that is where all ideas exist. For Augustine, ideas don't just exist in just some world where there's no mind. If there's going to be ideas, there has to be a mind that can host those ideas, such as the ideas of the tree. And when we look around at the material world in front of us, Augustine argued that that is governed by the speech of God, the Word of God. And he's getting this from both the Hebrew Bible, in Genesis chapter 1, you have a depiction of God speaks creation into existence. And so Augustine argues that the creation is governed by the speech of God. And then when you get to the Christian New Testament, you have, in, say, the Gospel of John, you have the phrase, "In the beginning was the Word," and the Word is the thing that governs creation. And for Augustine, this idea that God is where all ideas are hosted, and the idea that the physical world around us is speech, is essential for all ethical truths, and it's essential for his political thought. So where would an idea like justice exist? Well, justice is not a physical thing that you can grab out into a material world. Justice is an idea that exists inside the mind of God. And, well, where does justice exist in the real world? Well, because the real world is governed by the speech of God, it's governed in a way that gives us pictures of justice in the world. And that's how Augustine is influenced by Plato, but he also nuances Plato's thought to adhere to Christian theology. So he deals with the eutropho dilemma that Plato brought up in his writings. For Plato, the idea of goodness is an impersonal form or concept. Augustine argued that the concept of goodness is meaningless apart from a personal agent. So to ever call something good or bad, that involves a personal judgment. There has to be a mind that says good versus bad. And for Augustine, God just is goodness. There's no distinction that can be made from that. And so that's how Augustine understands the Euthyphro dilemma. But he does hold to the privation theory of evil, just like Plato did. So there's not like an evil thought in the mind of God. What evil is just moving away from God. So Plato argues that evil is the privation of good. For Augustine, it's the privation of God. It's moving away from God. And so, again, you see Christian theology that's just built into this. So now when it comes to political thought, Augustine has this famous statement, "Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds rest in thee." When Augustine starts to think about the individual and starts to think about society as a whole, Augustine argues that any just society will be founded on worship. And specifically, it's worship of the Lord. Now, Plato had a similar concept to this as well, but for Plato, it's sort of a reference to the realm of the forms, the ideals of goodness, truth, and beauty. For Augustine, that ideal is a person, not just an ideal. And so a society needs to center around the person of God, and when it doesn't do that, it is becoming an unjust society. And so again, Augustine says, what is that which we call evil but the absence of good? So societies go bad when they're not centered around good. Now that's true for societies, that's true for individuals, and Augustine has, in his Christian view of things, original sin. So he actually argues in his City of God that we can never achieve a just society here on earth because people, all people, including kings, are sinful. So where Plato and Aristotle are trying to find this just ruler who will rule everyone according to justice and virtue, Augustine says that's not possible. Kings are just as sinful as everyday humans, and so the chances of finding a just king to do that is impossible in this world. And so he divides the world between two types of world that we're living into. And these are kind of concepts for Augustine, but they're also based in a story that he sees as being real, the Christian story where God creates everything and it's very good. Humans, because of original sin, fall away from the perfection of God. And then Augustine sees Jesus actually as being the king that Plato and Aristotle are thinking about. But the only problem is Jesus is running the city of God, not the city of man. And so we have no hope of creating heaven on earth here until Jesus, the true king, returns. And so because of this, he has a very low view of politics. He believes that it's necessary, but politics just focuses on the city of man, which again is this world that we're living in right now. And so even though that's true, there is a purpose for government, and for him, it's just to restrain evil. That's the only purpose. Where the Greek philosophers before him thought that the purpose of government is to help create virtuous citizens, Augustine says that's not possible. The church is responsible for creating virtue, but the government can't do that. It's a necessary evil to restrain evil. And if the government can do that, it's doing all that the government is created to do. Now, this idea will be taken up by later philosophers, specifically John Locke, who argues that the purpose of government is to protect rights. That's what the purpose of government is. For Augustine, it's to restrain evil, which is to stop people from coercing other people. that is very similar to what John Locke is talking about when he's talking about the purpose of government is to protect property, to protect rights, and to protect life. That will be John Locke that we'll get to later. But that finds its roots back into Augustine. Aquinas, who comes after Augustine, has a little bit higher view of government than Augustine. He writes this: if the intention of the legislator, the government, is directed at the true good, i.e. the common good, and regulated according to the principles of divine justice. So now note, these are both important. So Aquinas agrees with Augustine that there's no human on earth that has virtue in themselves. But he's imagining a legislator basing their idea of the good on divine justice. He then says it follows that the law, which he frequently points back to being a biblical concept, will make men good absolutely. So there is a purpose of law that's beyond just restraining evil. It's to create some sort of virtue. So he goes on to say, if, however, the intention of the legislator is directed not at what is absolutely good, but at what is useful or pleasurable for himself, or opposed to divine justice, then the law does not make men good absolutely, but only relatively to a particular regime. So it's important for legislators, for a governor, not to have goodness and virtue inside themselves, but to look at divine justice and try to govern according to that. So it doesn't have to come within. He goes on to say, as the philosopher in Politics, Book 3 tells us, there are various forms of government. The most outstanding are a kingdom in which one man rules. And I should say that one man for Aquinas is Jesus. So that's the type of government that he sees as being the ideal government. But of course, you can have lesser types of that here on earth. So he does see a kingdom in which one man rules as being the highest form. So he agrees with the philosopher that's Aristotle. Every time he talks about the philosopher, Aquinas loves Aristotle, and he just considers him the philosopher. But he agrees with Aristotle and with Plato that a government which one person is ruling is the best type of government if it's in accordance with virtue. And then he says, and an aristocracy. So you have one person ruling at the top, but then you also have a small group of people underneath of him, a government by which the best men in which a small number of people rule according with virtue. So you have one person on the top, and then you have a small group of men. So with Aquinas, as I said, he has a higher view of government than Augustine, and he agrees with Aristotle about the relationship between laws and virtues. So the government is created to establish virtues, and that's what laws are about. But the types of laws to make them just, you have to consider the divine legislator, that is God. And if you create laws based upon divine legislation, that should create virtuous citizens, or at least help create virtuous citizens. Now, to do this properly, you need a small number of virtuous men who will lead as governors. And presumably these would be people who care about the divine law. But now he also agrees with Augustine that men are sinful, and at the end of the day that they're accountable to God. And one of the problems that the Greek philosophers had is if you create a situation where you have either a monarch or an aristocracy, who is going to keep those small number of people accountable? Because the citizens are accountable to the governors, to kings, but who are the kings accountable to? Aquinas says it is essential that kings recognize that they are accountable to God at the end of the day. And if you don't have men who are accountable to God, then you cannot have the hope of creating a just society that are helping to lead the people into virtue. So that is a very simple overview of Aristotle, Augustine, and Aquinas. As I've mentioned before, try to read their works as best as you can. Hopefully you can get through all of it. But if not, skim what you need to, and then follow the prompts for the assignments this week on D2L. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email.